Hi everyone, and welcome to this session on our experience integrating with Azure Logic Apps. My name is Alex Feuchtwanger. I'm the Data and Insights Manager for FightMND. We are a small charity based in Melbourne, Australia, that do fundraising for research into motor neurone disease, or ALS as it's known in the States. I wanted to do this session to share our challenges with integration and the solution that we've opted for and our experience so far. This is going to be mainly targeted at people in a similar position to myself, data leads or managers at organizations, non-profits or higher education, anyone who's using a Blackbaud product with Sky API as a CRM, who has a number of different platforms or third-party apps where their supporters or users are interacting with them, and where data is being created that they want to capture. As you might have already guessed, this session is entirely pre-recorded, as I'm based in Australia and currently it's 5 a.m. for me. So unfortunately, you won't be able to ask any questions and get answers during the session. But if you do want to ask any questions, I'll make sure that my contact details are shared, and I'd be really happy to hear from you and answer any questions by email. So we'll move on into the presentation. Our problem. I think hopefully this will be familiar to a lot of you. On the next slide is a bit of a diagram that shows our kind of situation, and it is a bit daunting, and even just to look at, let alone to try and work with. This is basically setting out our ecosystem of platforms that we use where donors and supporters can interact with us. And it's obviously very complicated. And hopefully this is, I'm sure this is not just unique to us. Things grow up over time. More and more platforms get added until you end up with something like this. Certainly for us, it was the case of wanting to be where our donors were, and therefore adding, any platform that we could, where we might be able to get some more donations in. And then we end up, after we've only been going 8 or 9 years, so it's not like we've had that long to accumulate all of these, but they grow up, pretty quickly, and so we've ended up in this position where we have all of these different platforms and none of them really talk to each other. And so the impacts are basically that if we want to form a complete picture of who our donors are and where they're interacting with us, then we are going to have to export data from each and every one of these platforms and import it into Razor's Edge, which, as I'm sure probably everybody on this in this session is aware, is quite difficult and time consuming. And so if we were ever going to do it, we were just going to be spending enormous amounts of time on those imports. And practically what happened is those imports didn't happen. And so we've just got fragmented, siloed data across all of these different platforms, and we don't have a complete picture of our donors and their interactions with us. And the results of that, we can't personalize effectively, because we don't necessarily know what someone's latest gift is, because it could be on Shout or Grassroots. And so if we wanted to refer to that in an email, we don't have a good chance of being accurate, which is obviously the worst thing that you can do when you're trying to personalize your communications. And it also contributes to a lack of trust in the data internally. So people in the fundraising team and the marketing team don't want to use or rely on the data that we have because we know that it's not complete. So clearly this is not an ideal situation, it's not a sustainable one, and we wanted to change that. So I only joined in December 2022, and it was one of my top priorities from the start is to try and work on an integration solution. So we'll move on, and then for the rest of the presentation, we're going to be talking about what that solution is. So clearly we needed a solution, and I wanted to make sure that we laid the groundwork for it and got buy-in. And so that's why my first step was to make sure that it was one of our key pillars in our new data strategy that I kind of put together and presented to our board in the early parts of this year. And you can see here that it's got, real prominence given to integration and automation, highlighting the need to connect all of these platforms together, and that will then enable us to do all sorts of things, including automating interactions with donors, and particularly really contributing to our reporting and insights capability by providing that comprehensive picture. So I started to think about it in terms of, how do we connect one platform to Razor's Edge? How do we connect this platform? How do we connect that platform? And I started to realize that actually what we really needed was a comprehensive solution that could provide integrations for all of the platforms. And so that's why I started looking at different iPaaS or integration platform as a service providers. And my first step was really to kind of get a sense of who the players in the market are. It was not something that I had any familiarity with before I started this role. So I was really kind of learning from scratch, doing my research to try and understand who was out there and what they could offer. So I met with kind of reps from all of these companies after having read about them online to try and understand what their offer was, what the pros and cons of one versus the other were, and what their crucially what their pricing was like. And so it took quite a lot of time. It was quite an investment to really get to understand the offers that each one had, and the costs involved, because they've all got different pricing models. But I think it was really worthwhile because it meant that I was able to make a really well-evidenced case to my director and my CEO, and consequently to the board, about the solution that we eventually chose and how it compared to what else was out there. So I don't want to, share all of the details about pricing that we got from each of these companies, but they've got various different models, including, a platform fee that includes a certain number of integrations, or, price per flow. And we were finding all of those either a bit inflexible or just quite a long way out of our price range. It's obviously a challenge for a lot of nonprofits trying to do quite a lot with quite a little in terms of resources. And so that was one of the key drivers of our decision to go with Azure and Logic Apps. But there were a bunch of other reasons that I'll take a look at now. So as I mentioned, the pricing was a real key driver. with well, Logic Apps, but Azure in general. You can opt for completely consumption-based pricing, so there are no fees that are there regardless of how much you use it. It's completely based on usage, and that suited us a lot, especially because we have it's very seasonal. Our the amount of donations and user interaction in general that we're getting on all of these third-party platforms is highly based around like our main campaign, which runs over May and June each year, and that's when we get 90% of our revenue, and obviously then 90% of all of the interactions and events on all of these platforms were happening over that time. So we really didn't want to pay, a monthly fee for a flat rate of usage that we either weren't going to need 10 months of the year or were going to be way over 2 months of the year. So that worked well for us. There's also Microsoft offer sponsorship for non-profits, which was really quite easy to get. We just had to, I think as long as you're a registered non-profit in whatever country or territory you're in, then you can apply to get that accreditation from Microsoft, and then the sponsorship is applied automatically, which in Australia works out as $1,500 worth of credits for Azure annually, which currently it looks like we will not exceed. So that's completely takes care of our costs from our usage. So that was obviously a huge selling point in comparison to a lot of the other vendors. Another thing about Azure Logic Apps that really appealed to us is that there are a great many out-of-the-box connectors, and that covered quite a few of the platforms that we wanted to integrate, but it wasn't not limited to those. You can also create your own. So they have a lot of facility and assistance for creating custom connectors. So you can basically create your own custom connector for any REST API. So any service or platform or app that has its own API, pretty much you would be able to create your own Logic Apps connector. So that was a real advantage to us because, yeah, there were quite a few of the key platforms that we wanted to integrate that didn't have their own Logic Apps connector already available. Another big advantage is low or no code development. I think is one of the key principles of how Logic Apps is designed. So I had some experience before, more with Power Automate than Logic Apps, but they are very, very similar, as I'll get into a bit more later on, for those of you that have no familiarity with Logic Apps. But if you've worked in Power Automate, then a lot of things will feel very, very familiar and intuitive to you. So that was a big advantage for us as well. And then obviously everybody has to be extremely mindful of security. And so we wanted, we just felt reassured by the fact that it was a Microsoft product and that we benefited from all of the research and investment that they do into security. And yeah, I've just added in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for iPaaS providers, which shows that Microsoft, is described as a leader by them, alongside Workato, which was another one of the ones that we seriously looked at. Some of the other ones in that leaders quadrant, it seemed from my research that they were really much more targeted at huge enterprises with vast data volumes and really complex needs, much less suitable to the kind of small and medium enterprise or non-profit or higher education institution. So you can see Tray is also rated highly, but not yet considered a leader. And I think the other ones that I was looking at were much smaller players, and so didn't make it onto the Magic Quadrant. But clearly Microsoft is well regarded in this space. So once we decided on Logic Apps as the solution, we then needed to take a look at how we were going to deliver what we wanted to do. And yeah, as I mentioned, I'd done quite a bit in Power Automate in previous roles, so I knew that I'd be able to design workflows and kind of manage runs and understand some basic troubleshooting. But really we were going to need a proper technical specialist in this area to be able to achieve what we wanted to. And we were very fortunate in that we got a word of mouth referral from someone that we were already working with to someone who had real Logic Apps expertise. And we brought him on board as a freelancer, which has been really, really productive and completely essential to what we've been doing. And I think, we did look at a couple of other suppliers, and including kind of one larger IT services company. And again, part of the choice came down to cost. They were much more expensive. And I think from where we are, our use case isn't exceptionally complicated. So it felt like we didn't need to bring on a whole team, that one developer could probably handle it all. And so that was part of our rationale for our choice. And yeah, things are still quite early days in terms of where we're at with everything, but so far we're making a lot of progress, and I think things are going really well. So I would definitely recommend our approach. So we wanted to start with a less complicated use case to really just build our experience, test things out, learn from it, and work out what we would do as we moved on to more complicated integrations. So this use case that we started with is about connecting web forms to Razor's Edge NXT, which sounds relatively simple, but we found that the key challenge was how to implement a duplicate search and matching. And we felt it was really worth investing time upfront in getting this right, because we were going to reuse that logic in every integration that we did. That problem is going to be the case whatever app or platform you're trying to connect to Logic Apps. So we use Gravity Forms as our web form solution, and those are embedded into our website, and that all works really well. But ever since we started using it, we have had no connection between that and Razor's Edge. So, as with everything else, it's been a process of exporting from Gravity Forms and importing into Razor's Edge whenever we wanted to do anything, which is obviously time consuming, and it means that we don't have kind of real-time access to that data. So this felt like as well as a reasonable first test case, also quite a priority, because coming into our main annual campaign, we've got a competition that we run that last year we got 20,000 entries for. And then we want to be able to email all those people during the campaign. So being able to have them entered into Razor's Edge automatically was going to be a real advantage to us. So this flowchart kind of summarizes the process for the integration and the logic of the apps. And what we ended up landing on was splitting it out into two apps. One main app that includes the trigger from Gravity Forms, and then a second app that we're referring to as an upsert app that does the update or insert, hence upsert, for those of you who have never heard that term before, like me, that then, updates or inserts or creates a constituent and then passes it back to the main app to continue on the rest of the process. The reason why we did that is really reusability. We can now have any other app that we build for any other integration call this same upsert app, and it will just work in exactly the same way. We don't have to create the same steps in every single app, and then potentially, if we need to change the duplicate matching logic, have to change it again in every single app. So that was why we went the way that we did there, and I think it's going to be really it's useful down the line. It's obviously been a bit more work to develop it up front, but I think it's going to create big savings for us later on. So now let's go take a look at how it actually looks in Logic Apps. So here we are in the Logic Apps designer view for one of the apps that we've developed. So for those of you who are Power Automate users, it will immediately look pretty familiar with this flowchart layout. We're currently in the preview designer for Logic Apps, so it does look a little different, but I think this will probably be, I don't know, I assume this will be rolled out to Power Automate as well, and I do think it's an improvement. So we'll just take you through the steps and how it moves from the one app to the other and back again. So here we have the form itself, the trigger. So data is submitted to this form, and then this brings the data from the form into the app, and then that's passed to the next step, and this basically sends the data from the form to the other app. So we'll switch over and take a look at that one. So this one starts with the trigger for this app is an HTTP request that gets the key data from the person who submitted the form from the other app. And you can see here, that's just email, first name, last name, and phone. We think that's sufficient for doing a reasonable duplicate search and match. So the next action is a Razor's Edge one. So this is the duplicate search action in the NXT constituents connector, which is based on this duplicate search endpoint in the constituents API. And so here we just search for individual constituents with those details. And that returns an array of matching constituents with a rank. And so these next steps filter that array based on rank to find the closest duplicate. And if we do find a matching duplicate, then we move on to create a new constituent. Sorry, if we find a matching duplicate, we move on to getting that constituent and updating them with the new information. And if not, we create a constituent. And then once that's done, it posts the app posts the response, and then we flip back into the main app. So this action receives the response and enables the details to be used in subsequent actions. So then we move on to just adding first we add the other data from the form to that constituent's record. We basically just decided that anything that would be done to a constituent, whether they already existed or have been created from scratch, we would do in the main app. So here we just add their date of birth from the form, and then we move on to really just adding other details, including their address, but then onto the metadata that we need to add to these constituents to help us identify where they came from, and analyze and interact with them in the future. So here we've really just got all of these actually are just actions that add a custom field or an attribute to the constituent with specific metadata that we wanted to have. And that's really it. So that's the end of what I'll show you in Logic Apps, and we'll head back over to the slides now. So what have we achieved so far? Well, we've got 10,000 plus form entries, and we're expecting about another 10,000 to come in, and they've all been added directly into Razor's Edge using this app, which has saved us already a lot of time on importing and user interaction in duplicate matching. And it's meant that each time we send an EDM out to our supporters and everybody who's engaging in this campaign, we know that the latest data is in there, and everybody who's entered the competition is getting our other updates about the campaign. So far we're really pleased, and we're now looking ahead at what's next. So we have two top priority integrations that we'll be working on from now. These are Shout, aka Shout for Good, and Grassroots. Grassroots is mainly a peer-to-peer / event fundraising platform, and Shout is one that's kind of specific to Australia. It's run by one of the big Australian banks, but they provide us with a lot of donation and merchandise sales for our main campaign. So these two are top priorities for us, and they don't have pre-existing Logic Apps connectors. So our developer is working on custom connectors for both of these, which, as I mentioned before, you can do from any RESTful API, and he's working on you can import the JSON definition of the API, and from there the custom connector wizard in Logic Apps will recognize the actions that can be created from the different endpoints in that API, and then you can just customize those actions to build all of the triggers and the actions that you need for your integrations. So we're working on those, and then once they've been built, we can then just, as I said before, really reuse the logic that we've got from the app that we've already created to do that duplicate search and matching, and then combine that with the custom connectors. Both of these will be a bit more complicated than the example that I showed you that we've already done, because of course we need to add gift records as well as the constituent records. So we'll, I'm sure, encounter some challenges that we've not yet thought about when it comes to doing that. But I think that the process and our approach will be similar. Obviously, we don't need to worry about about duplicate matching, but I think we'll just take a systematic approach to making sure that we get all of the metadata in there that we would if we were importing the data directly into Razor's Edge. So as I've said, those two are really our next priorities. And after that, we'll be looking at some others. So a couple that will hopefully be easier because they do already have Logic Apps connectors are WooCommerce, which we use for some of our online sales, and also SurveyMonkey. But then we'll move on to some others that also need custom connectors like PayPal and Xero, which is our accounting platform. Xero will probably be the biggest challenge of the lot because it's the only one where we'll be looking at a two-way integration. All of the others, it's just somebody goes on there and donates or makes a transaction or fills out a form, and then we want that data to be pushed into Razor's Edge to update a constituent and or a gift record there. With Xero, we want that functionality because we, for example, transactions that we get direct into our bank account, they're the only place that they are recorded is in Xero. So we would like to be able to get them into Razor's Edge as well. So we need to push those from Xero to Razor's Edge, but also to help our finance team with the process of coding and reconciliation, we want the benefit of all of the data that we're getting into Razor's Edge to also be available in Xero. So we actually need to pass data from Razor's Edge to Xero, which will be a whole new challenge that we've not really started to explore yet. So I think we'll have a lot of work to do, and I think this project will continue on for some time. But so far, we've already started to see some really valuable results, and I think going forward, there's a lot more that we can achieve. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you very much for your time. I really hope that this has given you some understanding of one potential approach for integrating between different platforms, and hopefully inspired you to go on your own integration journey if you haven't already. As I said before, please get in touch by email or on LinkedIn if you have any questions or you'd like to know any more about what we've done. We don't have any code samples to share at the moment, but hopefully that's something that we will have in the future, or perhaps custom connectors for some of those platforms available on the Azure Marketplace. So once again, thank you for your time and have a great day.